Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Lerner, and I'm the Director of Horticulture at the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach. For more than 40 years, the Preservation Foundation has been dedicated to preserving the architectural and cultural heritage and the unique scenic quality of the town of Palm Beach. As part of my director position, I have the privilege to oversee the care and management of Pan's Garden, Florida's first all-native botanical garden. When the foundation established Pan's Garden in 1994 as a botanical garden of native plants, I'm not certain that the leaders of the foundation imagined that the garden, built on land reclaimed from a parking lot in an old rundown house a block north of Worth Avenue, would ultimately help to transform landscapes in the town of Palm Beach and beyond. Giving support to the town's new landscape ordinance requiring 30% of all new plants to be native, and inspiring the foundation's upcoming town-serving project, the transformation of 18 acres Phipps Ocean Park to an all-native, multiple ecosystems, life-sustaining park, are just two of the myriad results of that bold action in 1994. And it was during a tour of the garden that I was giving for our new friends David Camp and Michael Rubin that they were inspired to share Braiding Sweetgrass with us, knowing that the book would deeply resonate for us. That day in Pan's Garden brought us to this day with Robin and with all of you. So let me introduce Robin. As a botanist, Robin Wall Kimmerer has been trained to ask questions of nature with the tools of science. As a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation, she embraces the notion that plants and animals are our oldest teachers. In Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin brings these two lenses of knowledge together to take us on a journey that is every bit as mythic and as it is scientific, as sacred as it is historical, as clever as it is wise, so said Elizabeth Gilbert. Drawing on her life as an Indigenous scientist and as a woman, Kimmerer shows how other living beings, asters and goldenrod, strawberries and squash, salamanders, algae and sweetgrass, offer us gifts and lessons, even if we've forgotten how to hear their voices. In reflections that range from the creation of Turtle Island to the forces that threaten its flourishing today, she circles toward a central argument that the awakening ecological consciousness requires the acknowledgement and celebration of our reciprocal relationship with the rest of the living world. For only when we can hear the languages of other beings will we be capable of understanding the generosity of Earth and learn to give our own gifts in return. And I give you Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin.
Miigwech, Susan, thank you for those kind words. And I'm really delighted to hear a bit about the history of the lands that you all care for. Because we're all online, I want to share some slides. So let me just share my screen here. There we go. All right. And what I want to do is to begin with a traditional protocol greeting in my language and say to you all, Bonjour. Shabadaski gish kokwene deshnakos. Budwe wad mikwenda, megazedo dem, minwa mako do dem, mikwech kinegego gamisha. And in my language, I tell you that I'm a Potawatomi woman of the Bear Clan and of the Eagles, and I'm really grateful to be with you here today. It's also part of our traditional protocol that we always begin with gratitude. And so I would ask that all of us just cast our minds back to this morning when we first put our feet on Mother Earth, and to remember that she gave us everything that we need. That first breath of morning air, a drink of water, food to enjoy, the companionship of one another, and clouds and oak trees, that everything we need is given to us. Oh, my slides are not advancing. Let me try something else here. There's always got to be some little tech problem, right? I guess that worked. Good. Okay. So I also want to tell you and bring you greetings from where I am here in the frozen north. I thought you'd especially appreciate a picture of snow. I consider myself to be a citizen of the nation of maples. Maple trees are certainly our leading citizens here in upstate New York, and I take great guidance from their roles as citizens in our community. And again, my slides are not going. There we go. Okay. I also want to think about where we all are. You in Palm Beach, me here in upstate New York, and knowing that we are all on Indigenous territories. Perhaps you know this map in this website, nativelands.ca, that allows us to interrogate wherever we are on the map and know on whose homelands we are living. Because all of us are living on Indigenous homelands. And the question that we will entertain in Braiding Sweetgrass and in our time together this afternoon is, what do we do about that? What are our responsibilities? I live today here in the Indigenous homelands of the Haudenosaunee Nation, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. Right over the back hill from where my old farm is the territory of Onondaga Nation, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of history, of land, and certainly of knowledge of how it is that we care for our homelands. I also want to tell you, as folks interested deeply in sense of place, a little bit more about this region that I live in. I'm Potawatomi, so I'm Anishinaabe, Great Lakes people, and I live here today in Haudenosaunee territory. And it turns out that Anishinaabe peoples, Potawatomi among them, and Haudenosaunee peoples live together in this shared Great Lakes habitat of tremendous abundance, and had to come to some agreement about how it is that people of different nations, different backgrounds, and languages, and cultures might live together in this homeland. And so what we created together was the Nagan Gebejik Mkwan. It's a treaty written in wampum beads. You're looking at a wampum belt here, the dish with one spoon treaty belt. My people and my neighbors today both have copies of this. And what this belt says that I think will be of interest to you is that we will experience and honor the earth as if it was a bowl that Mother Earth had filled for us. One big dish filled with everything that we need. And our responsibility as human people, regardless of our culture, is to keep that bowl clean and full, because when it's empty, it's empty. Now notice that this treaty is about the dish that Mother Earth fills for us, but it's also about the spoon from which we consume the gifts of Mother Earth. And notice that in this agreement, there's just one spoon. Not a big one for some people and a little one for others. This is a statement about justice and sharing, isn't it? That our responsibility is to share the gifts of the earth with one another, as well as with the more than human people as well. And my good colleague, Neil Patterson of the Tuscarora Nation, reminds us that what you're looking at here is the oldest conservation policy on Turtle Island. And while we begin with gratitude to say to ourselves and take inventory of all the gifts that we've been given, Despite the fact that the earth just showers us with these gifts, we find ourselves enmeshed in economies and social institutions that are relentless in asking us, what more could we take from the earth? Where I think the question that we need is, what does the earth ask of us? What is our responsibility in return for this bountiful bowl that Mother Earth has filled for us? And I don't need to tell you, you know the wounded places as well as I do. We hold them in our heart, that our very existence here, our sustainability, is in question. And that question's sustainability is something I want to start off with by thinking about the fact that what this word sustainability means. It's already been invoked in our introductions and our thinking together. And just a short story about that. A friend of mine, Carol Crow, an Algonquin biologist, tells the story about going to her tribal council and asking for a grant to go to a sustainability meeting. And her elders said, well, what's sustainability? And she kind of laughed, thinking, well, that's the way our people have lived well in place since time immemorial. And she gave them these definitions that you and I use every day. I've highlighted some of the things that they have in common. Mostly, sustainability is understood as processes and practices that allow us to ensure the attainment and continued satisfaction of human needs. And so what they told her is, yeah, you go to that meeting, but we want you to go and carry this message with you. That sounds to us like they're just trying to keep on taking. It's not all right to keep on taking. When your feet hit the ground in the morning, we should be thinking, what can we give? What can we give back to the earth? And I know that this way of thinking about sustainability is something that must be on your mind as well, given your support for the gardens and other land stewardship projects. What is it that we can give? And that is the central question of the book Braiding Sweetgrass that you were so kind to invoke in our gathering this afternoon. That's really what Braiding Sweetgrass is all about. How can we use indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of the land or of the plants themselves in order to answer this question of what is it that we have to give and how shall we give it? This relationship between indigenous knowledge, science, and Western science, and the knowledge of the plants has not always been clear for me. You were looking at a model of a relationship between those knowledges in Wiengushk, in Sweetgrass herself, who you almost always see braided, as you do in this photograph. Those braids of Sweetgrass represent braids of Mother Earth's hair, because in our teachings, Sweetgrass is the hair of Mother Earth. It's one of the first plants to grow on Mother Earth. And so we braid it as a sign of our care for her beauty and her continued thriving. This question of how can we care for thriving? How can we care for Mother Earth? Using these three ways of knowing is really important to me as a scientist, as a writer, as an educator, as a person. But their relationship was a journey for me to bring them together. Just a tiny bit of a story that some of you might be familiar with if you've read the book already. It takes place in September when the goldenrod and the asters that you see here are in bloom. I was born a botanist, I swear I was, and goldenrod and asters have always been really dear to me, probably because they bloom in September, which is when my birthday is. And I always thought, oh, this is a big, colorful celebration just for me in the self-centeredness of a child. But one of the interesting things about goldenrod and asters is that they bring that purple and gold right next to each other. They could grow on opposite sides of the field, but they don't. They grow intermingled with one another to give us this gorgeous display. So in a September long ago, when I was heading off to college, these plants guided me. I knew that I would have, when I went away to school, an interview with my first professor, my first botany professor. And boy, I wanted to do it right, because I was going to a forestry school where I would be, in that time, one of the only women in the whole campus, and certainly the only Native student on campus. So I wanted to be ready. So when my professor said to me, "Why do you want to study botany?" I said, "I want to know why goldenrod and asters look so beautiful together. I want to know why they grow together and delight us in this way." And he said, "My dear, that is not science. If you're interested in beauty, you should have gone to art school, not become a scientist." And I was stunned and disappointed and scared. And so I tried again, and I said, I also want to know why plants make medicine for us, and why some plants bend for baskets and other ones do not. And he said, "Not science, but tell you what, you take my botany class, then you'll really learn what plants are about." And that's why I look so happy in my freshman photograph, taken that very same day, when it seemed to me that I had made a grave mistake in going away to study science. As if the way that I, as an Indigenous woman, thought about plants had been taught by plants all my life was wrong. That the way that I was thinking meant that I should not be part of this community. It was very disheartening. In a way, my first day of higher education was not unlike my grandfather's first day, because my grandfather was taken to the Carlisle Indian School, whose motto was to kill the Indian and save the man. The man, he was just a boy of 9 years old, taken away from his parents on a reservation in Oklahoma and brought here, where his way of being and thinking, his language, his understanding of himself, his culture, and of the land was deemed unacceptable and needed to be replaced. I felt that very much in my own education, because in going away to study botany, my understanding in the Indigenous paradigm of nature as subject, as plants and animals, and the land herself as persons, as beings, as subjects, was deeply ingrained. But when I went to study botany, I found out that this was the Western paradigm, this idea of nature as object, nature whose dominant metaphor was as a machine that human beings were in charge of. Is it any wonder that I nearly failed freshman botany? So foreign was this way of thinking to me. I want to tell you that this braiding together of Western science and Indigenous knowledge that really creates the core of Braiding Sweetgrass has been a lifelong journey of trying to bring both of these ways of knowing together. And that right down the hall from where my professor told me that my way of thinking was not welcome in science, that I should have gone elsewhere, we have today the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, whose very mission is to bring together Indigenous knowledge, Western science, and the teachings of plants. We today use as a model what is known as two-eyed seeing, of using not just one lens on the world of Western worldview, but of indigenous science and Western science. How much more would we know if we brought both of these together? And this theme of two-eyed seeing is also an important thread through Braiding Sweetgrass, through my work as a plant ecologist, botanist, and as a writer. Within the Center for Native Peoples and within my own work, another model of knowledge integration is important, not just two-eyed seeing, but in indigenous ways of knowing, at least in Potawatomi ways of knowing. We use these medicine wheel teachings that remind us that a human person can understand the world, yes, with intellect, yes, with that which we can sense and measure in body, but also with emotion and with spirit, and that all of these ways of knowing are valuable in problem solving and helping us decide our path forward. And as a writer, I have found it immensely important and helpful to follow this model and to say that in storytelling, it's not enough to just give people information and knowledge, right? What we need is wisdom. What we need is an ethical system that binds us to the physical world in this covenant of reciprocity. And that all these ways of knowing are key to healing our relationship with the earth. And so this question of how do we reciprocate the gifts of the earth with our own gifts is our call. How do we do that? There are so many ways. We could talk for hours, and I kind of wish we had hours, to be able to say, what are all of the ways that we can reciprocate the bounty of the earth? You see some of these examples here. I like to distill it down to the very simple of, raise a garden. Raising a garden, as you are doing, caring for land, is a powerful way to reciprocate the gifts of the earth. Raise a garden, raise good children, and raise a ruckus when you need to on behalf of the living world. And that often takes the form of conservation and preservation, as your own organization is calling that. So let's think for a minute about what we mean by conservation. What are we conserving through our efforts? Seems like a straightforward question, but in fact, the approach to conservation or preservation depends on what we think land is. What does it mean to set aside land for protection? Protection of what? What are we hoping to gain? Conservation is often embedded in the Western paradigm of what land means, where land is primarily associated with the concept of property, a bundle of rights. Property is a rights-based concept that says, because I own this land, I can determine its fate, either to protect it or to destroy it, right? Those are my choices because I own it. Land is understood certainly as capital, and in your communities, I know these notions of development and property and capital are problematic for land conservation for sure. In the Western lens, through that one lens, land is also understood as a source of natural resources, as if the land were a warehouse filled with products, and it is a source of ecosystem services. These things are the hallmarks of the Western worldview. So if we're conserving land, is this what we're conserving? Well, through the indigenous lens, through that other lens of the pair of glasses, land is understood as our fundamental source of identity. Land is who we are. Land is the one who sustains us, who takes care of us if we take care of it. Land is not only our home, but the residence of our more than human relatives as well. Land is the connection to our ancestors and the responsibility of ourselves as the ancestors that we will become. Land in the Indigenous lens is thought of as the library, as the teacher, as the source of knowledge. Land as the healer, the pharmacy for ills, both physical, emotional, spiritual. Because the land is inspirited, because the land is more than property, the land is home. In this thinking, this paradigm for what land means that we're not looking at a rights framework where I have rights to land, but that we understand that we have responsibility for land. And it is this way of being which motivates conservation through the Indigenous lens, because the land is sacred. The question really that faces us is land merely a source of belongings, or is it our most profound source of belonging? When people come to your garden, when people come to preserved landscapes, what are they seeking? That sense of relationship, of belonging to a place, of accepting their responsibilities for that place in return for all of the gifts that come to us. So one of the questions that I wanted to share with you for your own thinking about and provocation later on is, how can the conservation and preservation community reconcile with the fact that every bit of land that we conserve are Indigenous homelands? That there are Indigenous homelands which were dishonorably taken. So how is it that our organizations in the conservation community can reconcile with this and do the work of land justice? To ask ourselves, in addition to our work as we understand it through the Western lens of conservation, to be thinking about that dish with one spoon. One spoon, who has access to that dish? Do the native peoples who have been forcibly removed from their homelands have the same access to those conserved lands as other members of the population? What does justice for the land look like? Restoring access, rematriation, returning land, maybe protected cultural areas, Indigenous land trusts in your community with your sense and experience and expertise in land conservation. Could those tools also be applied for justice for the land, for exercising the possibilities of land back? That's a way we can reciprocate the gifts of the earth with our own. But there are more. I want to just be a spur to your imagination in how we answer this question. One of the ways traditional to our people that we answer this question of how do we care for and give back to the land who cares for us is this practice of the honorable harvest. I share it with you because most of the threats to land, and I dare say most of the threats to human well-being, are driven by human overconsumption. On this, I think we can agree. And so any formula, any philosophy that allows us to get a grip on our dishonorable harvest consumption from the land could be a guide going forward. And the Indigenous paradigm of my people around how do we consume from the land doesn't say don't consume. We have to consume. We can't photosynthesize. We have to take from the land. But when we think of the land as our home, as sacred, as the home of our relatives, as the library, as the pharmacy, all of those things, how we take from the land really matters. If you just think of the land as property and natural resources, you can take any way you want because you have rights to that. But if you recognize responsibility to land, you consume in a very different way. This protocol was taught to me in picking berries, but it applies to everything that we take from the earth, which is everything that we consume. When you get to that field full of berries or to that shopping mall, we say, don't take the first one. If we don't take the first one, then this practice of self-restraint will contribute to never taking the last one. And if we do find more than one, we ask permission of those berry plants. May I share in your gifts? Do you have enough to spare that you could give some to me too? And then if we're going to ask permission, we have to listen for the answer. And we can listen for the answer using the tools of science, using the tools of the botanist, of the conservationist, to say, is this population healthy enough, vigorous enough that it could supply my needs? And if it is, we take only what we need. In a society which is relentless in asking us to take more, consume more, taking only what you need, this practice of self-restraint, is a really radical act of practicing enoughness. To say, I don't need to take any more from my plant and animal relatives because I already have enough. And use everything that you take well. We forget that the fastest way to have everything that we need is to not waste what we take. Be grateful. Give gratitude in return for everything that we have taken. Minimize harm in the way that we take. I've always been told, don't use a shovel if a digging stick will do. Minimize our disruption. Share everything that you've taken. Excuse me. And then reciprocate the gift. Give back in return for what you have taken. Sometimes we give a spiritual gift back. We also give back a very pragmatic gift to maybe weed around those berries or give them a little bit more sunlight or carry their seeds to where they need to be. Now, this protocol for how we fish or how we pick berries or how we cut firewood or dig medicine applies to every single thing that we take from the land. And this ancient practice of the honorable harvest has real resonance for the consumption-driven climate catastrophe which is upon us. I'm told that there is an even older part of the honorable harvest, which is take only that which is given to you. Take only that which is given. It reminds us that if we take more than what is given to us, we're stealing. And in a sense, we have been stealing from Mother Earth for these past few centuries. It's hard to discern what is given to us as opposed to what we want and what we take. And I haven't figured it out completely yet. But as I wrestle with it, I feel pretty darn sure that coal from mountaintop removal that despoils entire landscapes, that's not given to us. Tar sands oil that pollutes rivers, pristine lakes and underground aquifers, that's not given to us. But every day the sun shines, the waves roll. These sources of endless renewable energy are given to us on a daily basis, not without their own costs, to be sure, but might, had we paid attention to take only that which is given to us, to use the honorable harvest, would we today need to be afraid of our own atmosphere? How else might we reciprocate the gifts of the earth with our own gifts? I hope you're making a list of your own gifts. Again, to think about all these different ways that we human people, as bearers of art and science and hands in the earth, can care for and replenish that bowl that Mother Earth has filled for us. One of those forms of replenishment is, of course, restoration. And I was so happy to hear that restoration is part of the work that you are all doing in your community. Ecosystem restoration to me is a powerful form of reciprocity, of returning the gift, giving our gifts of engineering and art and science and gardening back to the land. And I've worked in the field of restoration ecology for a long time now, but you know this truth when you work on the land, that it's not the land that's broken. It's our relationship to land that's broken. And so our work in reciprocating our gifts, in healing the land, must also be engaged in healing our relationship to land. Else we simply perpetuate the same wounds over and over again. My friend Gary Nabhan, a wonderful writer and restoration ecologist, suggests that it's not just restoration that we need to do, it's restoration as well. Restoration, the opportunity to create together a different story about our relationship to land that allows us to live on the land in an honorable way, rather than in a way of injustice and exploitation. The earth asks us to change. That's what the earth asks of us. And our work in addressing climate change and the biodiversity loss can't just be the work of changing light bulbs. Technology is an important part of the climate solutions that we need to seek. Make no mistake, but that's not all we need to do. We also need to change the ways in which we're living, to change our story, to change our lenses on the world, to engage in two-eyed seeing. Because for too long, we have looked at the world through the lens of human dominion, human exceptionalism, as if there was a fictional pyramid that human beings are atop, and all the rest of the beings are subservient to us, they're our property, and as opposed to thinking about them as our kinfolk, that we are not in charge of the whole world, we are but one species in this web of relations. In so doing, in changing our minds and reimagining our role as humans, we're engaging in a bigger vision, reciprocal restoration, because when we heal the land, we are also healing ourselves. Lastly, how do we reciprocate the gift of the earth with our own gifts? So we think about what some of our finest gifts are. And as a writer, I think a lot about the beautiful gift we've been given of language, the gift that we use every day. And how might we turn our language toward being a tool of healing relationship with place? I want to share with you a reflection from Braiding Sweetgrass, again, that maybe some of you have encountered. When you look around your beautiful garden, your beautiful conserved landscapes, at all the beings who are there, in the English language, we refer to them all as it, don't we? That salamander is an it, that butterfly is an it. And in the English language, that's how our language is constructed. We objectify or it all living beings in nature. Now, mind you, I would never say it about you, about another person. Or the example I'd like to use is about your grandma. You know, if your grandma was here with us, would I say it's wearing a sweater? I would not. In itting your grandmother, I would steal her personhood. I would diminish her humanity. I would make her into nothing more than a thing. If I called her it, I would make her into an object. And that's what English gives us permission to do in this peculiar grammar of objectifying nature. In Potawatomi, that's impossible. Oh, I should say that you know what happens when we objectify beings, right? It sets them outside our ethics. It sets them outside our circle of moral responsibility. And so when we it the living world, we say, oh, well, it's just stuff. It's not really a being. We don't have responsibility to beings. Now, in Potawatomi language, it is impossible to say it about the living world. That goldenrod, that asters, those butterflies, we refer to them with a particular grammatical structure by which they are never it. They are always a who. They're always understood as a person. We speak of the living world with the same grammar that we do our family, because in Indigenous ways of knowing, through that other lens, they are our family. And I've gotten deeply interested in the role of grammar and language in providing us with a different sense of responsibility, a different sense of responsibility to place that we cultivate. And so I have a modest proposal for you, a thought experiment that you might want to try. To reclaim this grammar of animacy with new pronouns, could we, with full respect for Indigenous languages that speak of the living world as some ones, not some things, could we remedy this problem in the English language with new pronouns inspired by Indigenous languages? See what you think. In Potawatomi, we don't have pronouns in this same way. So this is an invention, an imagination inspired by Indigenous ways of knowing. I asked my language teacher, well, what is our word for just a being of the earth? Not a human person or a dog person or a tree person, just a person. And that word is Bamadisi Aki, a good being of the earth. And I had no illusions that we were going to adopt Bamadisi Aki into English language. But the end of Bamadisi Aki is Aki, which means the earth. And what about that last little sound, ki? If we were to speak respectfully of those maple trees, we could treat them as natural resources and objects and say, I'm going to go drill it. Or we could say, ki is giving us a gift this spring. Thank you. We could regard them with respect and honor. And from that position, the honorable harvest flows very easily. What would it be like to speak of the living world with respect rather than moral exclusion? And of course, you know, we're going to need a plural pronoun, aren't we? And the good thing is that we already have this word in English, which will suit us just fine. Let's just add an "and" to ki and get kin, so that we could speak of the living world not as objects, but as our family members. We could say about those geese, kin are flying south for the winter. Take good care. Come back home. We'll miss you. We don't need more words for objectification and extraction of the living world. What we need our ways of speaking with love and respect for all beings. Let me just close by saying that this notion of the personhood of all nature, the way that we use language, the way that we think about the living world, we could choose to think about it as a warehouse full of commodities and stuff, or we could think about them as our family and our relatives. Oh, sorry, I'm going to include this last thing because of the good work that you all do. When we think about the healing power of language, what about the role of place names in healing our relationships to place? Could you all, in your work in conservation, preservation, and sharing sense of place, be engaged in the re-indigenization of place names? That's a place where the gift of language and an awareness of Indigenous language could have tremendous import. Here's where I wanted to end. Yes. So in this ancient Indigenous idea of the personhood of all beings lies a new green way forward. You're looking here at a photograph of the Wanganui River in New Zealand, the sacred river of the Maori people. And they have been successful in, after decades of really hard work, in having the legal rights of personhood extended to their river. Their river has legal rights as a person, same as a human person would. Rights of nature, not only rights of human people. It's grounded in this grammar of animacy. Here in the United States, human people have legal personhood, and another entity, corporations, have legal personhood. Adopting this notion of the grammar of animacy and the personhood of all our relations is at the heart of the rights of nature movement, creating a new system of law with roots in this ancient paradigm. This law is one of the gifts that we human people have that we can give in return for all of the gifts that we have been given. Miigwech, thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to be able to take some questions from the community.
If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A right now, and there's a couple in there, so let me see what those are. From Melissa, how may those who are not indigenous respectfully incorporate Indigenous knowledge into their educational programs?
What a great question. So important to do. And at the root of your question is this notion that we should have two-eyed seeing, right? Not just tell the stories of our places from the Western settler perspective, but incorporate Indigenous knowledge as well. Of course, one of the best places to do that is to invite Indigenous voices into the work of storytelling around a place, but also to invite speakers, Indigenous community members, to do that work with you in partnership. But there's also an abundance of published literature around Indigenous place names, Indigenous understanding of plants and animals. Indigenous place names, again, are powerful ways to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into our teaching, rather than that, I think of how many parks, conserved places that I go to, where the signage at the outset begins with settler history, as if Native history was erased, as if the people who cared for and know that land best never existed. And so that is a powerful step forward to elevate Indigenous knowledge in the way that we educate one another about the land.
I guess that also answers this other question from Gaynell. In a place like Palm Beach County, in which the first peoples, Jaga and Job, are extinct groups, what could honoring First Peoples look like? I think you just spoke to that somewhat with naming, but is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yes, one of the most important things that we can understand is this, sometimes these fictions around extinction of people who adapted and changed, and because of the powerful forces of colonialism and removal, had to make other choices, right? Many times we have this story, well, those people are extinct. No, those people are still here. They've changed into a different kind of community. So I think about the work of Seminole people, right, in land conservation, storytelling, and knowledge making, to incorporate their stories into place is important.
Have you considered, this is interesting, have you considered, where is that? Proposing a bill in Congress with New Zealand as an example?
What a great question. This notion, the rights of nature, to my knowledge, has not made it into a bill before the Congress, but it has been adopted by municipalities all over the country and by tribes. Tribes and municipalities are taking this up on their own to say, we are going to declare our river with the rights of personhood. Been done for the Klamath River, for the Yurok, the city of Toledo had a municipal ordinance to declare Lake Erie a legal person with the rights to exist.
Wow,
So all of this is within your power. It's happened at the level of tiny towns and big cities. And so that's where it starts. I will also say that it is, and I skipped quickly over that slide as I was running out of time, that these very ideas are part of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth that are before the United Nations.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. You're from David Camp, the person who, the reason that you're here. Your talk is as eloquent as your writing. Thank you. My query deals with the power of writing to change minds, particularly young minds. Would you consider writing a book for children and young adults?
Are you a plant in the audience? Guess what? There is a young adult edition of Braiding Sweetgrass. It just launched in the very end of November, so it's brand new. It was adapted by a wonderful Indigenous writer by the name of Monique Gray Smith, and so it's available. You can find it in your bookstores, and yes, I have created a children's book. It is in the early stages of the process of making its way to the shelf.
Fantastic. Do you think that Indigenous languages should be taught to non-Indigenous persons? How to ensure learning the languages and philosophies, practices, not only languages, how to ensure learning the languages and philosophies and practices, not only the languages?
Well, that's a really complicated, I have to answer that in a complicated way. To me, it is a travesty that we force our students, including our native students, to learn German or French or Spanish to fulfill their language requirements in school. Meanwhile, native languages are going extinct because of the forces of colonization. So I think that having Indigenous languages in local schools, in universities, is really important. My own language is taught in public schools in Oklahoma, around our territories, for example. However, that's my opinion. There are and language keepers in my community, but there are plenty of Native communities who say, no, that is our language. We are the ones responsible for that language and for caretaking and speaking it, and it is ours. It's a marker of our identity, and it should not be taught to others. But given that the federal government, through places like the boarding schools where my grandfather lost intergenerationally, our language, I think, has the responsibility to fund language revitalization in a far greater depth than it is today.
Yeah, thank you. So here's another interesting question. What's the first step in bringing people into this space who have no clue, no interest, but they are our friends and we don't want to leave them behind?
What a wonderful, compassionate question.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think that you already know the answer because of the way your question is framed. You know, to me, it's not a matter of shaking our finger at people. It's extending a hand to people and saying, hey, come walk with me. Let's go and be in the presence of the teacher of the land. And let's talk about this. What do you love? You know, I think this question of what do you love too much to lose to climate change is a question that can frame a wholly different response to climate change. Say, what do you love too much to lose? And when we activate that love that we have for the living world and for each other, that's really powerful. And, you know, the friend that you're talking about, they really might not care about biodiversity, but I bet they care about their children. And they bet they care about their grandchildren and don't want their grandchildren to grow up in a world without birdsong. Those are the common ground, I think, that when we take somebody by the hand and show them what we love, we find it's contagious.
Well, on that note, Robin, thank you ever so much for this, sharing your sweet time with us. Really, what an inspiration.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And again, thank you for the work that you all are doing in the world. We need every one of us in these urgent times.
We do. And all of you out there, if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass or any of the other books by Robin, I heartily recommend. Braiding Sweetgrass will hold you dear, and I invite you to pick it up someplace. So once again, Robin, thank you so much.
Miigwech.